Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, October 3rd, 2024. 32 days until the presidential election. Republican nominee, former President Donald Trump, holds a rally in Saginaw, Michigan. And Democratic nominee, Vice President Kamala Harris, is in Ripon, Wisconsin, the birthplace of the Republican Party, getting the endorsement of former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney. President Joe Biden continues his trip to survey Hurricane Helene relief and recovery operations. Today, he was in Florida and Georgia. We'll also get an update from Georgia Governor Brian Kemp. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack is asked about the East Coast and Gulf Coast dock workers strike and the effect on food prices. Oil prices go up after President Biden says he may support an Israeli military strike on Iranian oil facilities, and an agreement between Great Britain and Mauritius to return sovereignty over the Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean to Mauritius, but a U.S. British military base on one of those islands, Diego Garcia, will remain. The deal ends what some call Great Britain's last African colony. And we start with former President Donald Trump, the Republican presidential nominee, holding a campaign rally at Saginaw Valley State University in Saginaw, Michigan. Detroit Free Press writes that every 4 years since 1992, the presidential candidate who won the county has also swept Michigan's electoral votes by winning the entire state. Thursday's visit will mark Donald Trump's 11th visit to Michigan this year and his second visit to the Saginaw area. The president spoke for well over an hour, covering many topics, one of them, immigration.
If they wanted to close the border, all the president has to do is say, close the border, I'm the president, close that border. That's what I did. And the border was closed. She keeps talking about, we want him to sign a bill. The bill they wanted me to sign was the worst bill you ever saw. 2 million people in. Everybody gets you're automatically a citizen of our country. The worst bill you've ever seen. And it would have done nothing. It would have hurt. But they use that as a ruse. No, they don't have to use that. All they have to do is say, close the border. They don't need a bill. I didn't have a bill. I closed the border. I said, close the border. Border Patrol, by the way, is fantastic. You know, they want to do their job. ICE wants to do their fantastic. She wants to get rid of ICE. She wants to get rid of ICE. Who's going to go into a nest of MS-13 killers? These ICE guys, they're tough as hell. I've seen it. They're tough, and they love our country, too. The corrupt media is outraged that I keep talking about the migrant crime epidemic. Well, I'm outraged that Kamala Harris keeps importing migrant criminals. These are among the worst criminals in the world. Remember when she said, no, migrants don't cause any crime. And I said, wow, they're pretty rough-looking people to me. They're pretty rough-looking people to me, and it turned out to be I was right. This was 2 years ago. They said, no, migrants don't, that our people are much more dangerous. No, it's not that way. It's the opposite. It's the absolute opposite. I'm outraged that according to new statistics, 13,099 convicted illegal alien murderers have been set loose into the USA. Be careful. I'm outraged that Kamala Harris freed 2 illegal alien thugs who assaulted, kidnapped, and murdered a 12-year-old girl named Jocelyn. You know Jocelyn. I'm outraged that Kamala released into America the predator, the animal who murdered Laken Riley. I'm outraged she let in the savages who raped and murdered Rachel Morin. I'm outraged on behalf of every American family whose children have been murdered by illegal alien and horrible, horrible, savage migrants that Kamala brought into this country. Kamala's agenda is bringing death and despair to America. I will restore light, hope, and dignity back into Michigan, and very quickly.
Former President Donald Trump, Republican presidential nominee, a rally today in Saginaw, Michigan. Story from the New York Times. Melania Trump, the former First Lady, said in a video on Thursday that there was no room for compromise on a woman's right to individual freedom. A day after a reported excerpt from her coming memoir said she supported abortion rights. Mrs. Trump's comments landed as former President Donald J. Trump and members of his party have struggled to convey a softer impression of their opposition to abortion, a key issue threatening his support with female voters and his attempt to return to the White House. She made her remarks in a promotional video for a new memoir scheduled for release on Tuesday. Her husband, who opposes federal abortion rights and has taken credit for helping overturn Roe v. Wade, did not immediately comment. That was from the New York Times. Here is the video posted by Melania Trump.
Individual freedom is a fundamental principle that I safeguard. Without a doubt, there is no room for compromise when it comes to this essential right that all women possess from birth: individual freedom. What does my body, my choice really mean?
Former First Lady Melania Trump posting that video on her X account. It was also reposted on her husband Donald Trump's Truth Social site. The video promoted her memoir, which goes on sale next week. The Guardian newspaper obtained a copy, releasing an excerpt overnight. And Melania Trump says in the book, "Why should anyone other than a woman herself have the power to determine what she does with her own body? A woman's fundamental right to individual liberty to her own life grants her the authority to terminate her pregnancy if she wishes." An article in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Vice President Kamala Harris will be in Wisconsin Thursday for her 5th campaign event in the state since accepting the Democratic nomination for president. Harris will be in Ripon in eastern Wisconsin for a smaller event than her past rallies. The event will be hosted at Ripon College. Former Republican Congressman Liz Cheney is set to appear at the event with Harris. Harris hosting a campaign event in Ripon is significant as the town is known as the birthplace of the Republican Party. According to a senior campaign official, Harris plans to address the significance of the Little White Schoolhouse, which hosted meetings that helped form the Republican Party in 1854. The campaign also touted endorsements from former Republican Wisconsin lawmakers ahead of Thursday's event. Reporting from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Liz Cheney was interviewed by WGBH Public Radio in Boston last week about her support for Kamala Harris in this year's presidential election.
You and your father have announced your support for Kamala Harris in this next election cycle. For lack of a better term, is that a big deal for you to have not have to do it, but to do it?
Look, I think if you had said 3 or 4 years ago that, you were going to have, Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney supporting Kamala Harris for president, people would have said that. How do we get to that place? But I have to tell you, for me, when you look at the choice between these two candidates, there is no choice. There's only one responsible, serious adult running for president right now, and that is certainly not Donald Trump. And Vice President Harris and I might disagree on issues. Certainly there are some we disagree on, but I am absolutely honored and proud to be supporting her. And I know that she wants what's best for our country. And I know that she will work hard to do what's right for this country. And I also know that she recognizes this broad coalition that's come together to support her is a reminder of how important it is for her to be a president for all Americans. And so it was not a hard choice at all. And I'm very proud to be supporting her.
Liz Cheney, former Congresswoman, Republican from Wyoming, in a WGBH radio interview last week. She is campaigning today with Kamala Harris, Vice President and Democratic presidential nominee in Ripon, Wisconsin. CBS News reports that when Senator J.D. Vance and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz faced off this week in the sole vice presidential debate of the campaign cycle, an estimated 43.15 million viewers tuned in to the debate hosted by CBS News across 15 broadcast and cable networks, according to Nielsen, a media analytics company. That figure does not include viewership on streaming platforms. While the 2024 debate was shy of the viewership garnered in 2020, it was up from 2016. President Joe Biden begins a UPI article planned on continuing his tour of areas devastated by Hurricane Helene Thursday as emergency crews unblocked roads and the death toll from the storm soared to more than 200. Biden arriving in Tallahassee, Florida to take an aerial tour of Florida's Big Bend area on the way to Perry, Florida, where Helene hit as a dangerous Category 4 hurricane. Biden will then cross the border into Georgia, where he will visit hard-hit Ray City. There he's expected to hear from local leaders about the damage and talk about the role of the federal government playing in recovery. On Wednesday, Biden visited hurricane damage in North Carolina and South Carolina. By air, he saw flooding damage from Asheville, North Carolina to Greenville, South Carolina. That was from United Press International. Here is President Biden speaking in Georgia.
A week ago, Hurricane Helene became one of the strongest hurricanes ever to hit Florida and this part of Georgia. Roofs ripped off the buildings. Massive trees crashed into power lines, setting off loss of heat, electricity. Flooding wiped out homes. We were just down in Florida to see homes that were, just wiped away. Just the entire island gone. Families, they lost everything, including loved ones, including family members. And I know it isn't the first time. Just over a year ago, a major hurricane hit these same communities. A couple months ago, Hurricane Debbie did the same thing. 3 in a row. 3 in a row. You've been through hell. 3 in a row. And I want you to know, I see you, I hear you, I grieve with you, and I promise you we have your back. We're going to stay until you're restored. Earlier today, I was briefed by Florida officials on the damage, and I met with first responders who've been working nonstop to provide aid and support to survivors. I did a walking tour of Keaton Beach with a bipartisan group of officials to survey what a 15-foot surge, some places went as high as 3 stories, does to a coastal community. Then I came here to Georgia to meet all of you to see firsthand how you're doing as well, because we're really in this together. We're separate states, but we're the United States of America. I want to thank Governor Kemp, who I spoke with again this morning. And Senator Warnock is behind me, Senator Austin Scott, Representative Sanford Bishop, old friends. In moments like this, it's time to put politics aside. Again, it's not one state versus other, it's the United States.
President Joe Biden in Ray City, Georgia. After his remarks, he was asked about a supplemental spending bill to fund hurricane relief, and that House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, has suggested that it doesn't need to take place immediately, that Congress does not need to come back from recess.
Speaker Johnson has said a supplemental can wait until after the election. What kind of timeline do you have in mind, sir?
We can't wait. Can't wait. People need help now. Thank you.
President Joe Biden in Ray City, Georgia. Story from Axios. Millions of people in the southeast lost power as Hurricane Helene tore through communities from Tallahassee, Florida to Damascus, Virginia, and everywhere in between. Many remain in the dark days later. The National Weather Service released a view from space that illustrates the trail of darkness left by Helene. The photo was taken from a NOAA satellite on Saturday, September 28th, more than a day after the storm's landfall in Florida. As of Wednesday night, more than 1 million outages remained across the region, nearly 1 week on from making landfall in Florida and flooding southern states with heavy rains. That was from Axios. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and Georgia Governor Brian Kemp did not join President Biden during today's trip to their states to review the hurricane relief and recovery efforts. On the flight down on Air Force One from Washington, D.C., reporters asked White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre about that.
Kemp, is he meeting with DeSantis while he's there, please?
So a couple of things. DeSantis is not going to be there, but we have been in touch with his team. We understand that he has other areas to survey today, but we have been in touch with his team. As you know, the president has been committed, a full administration. All the agencies are all hands on deck in trying to make sure that we deal with the devastation that we're seeing. You saw the president yesterday in North Carolina, South Carolina, the vice president in Georgia, and now we're going to Florida and Georgia ourselves. And so the governor can speak for his travel today, but he won't be there. But obviously, we've been in touch with his. The president spoke to Governor Kemp this morning. He won't be there, but we obviously are inviting them. They are welcome to join us, and we're doing everything that we can to make sure that we give some relief to folks on the ground, to Americans on the ground dealing with this disaster.
It was Governor Kemp. Has he spoken to Governor DeSantis?
Okay, sorry guys.
DeSantis?
I don't have a call to read out.
But he spoke to Governor Kemp again today.
He spoke to Governor Kemp, as I said at the top. I'm sorry guys, we got to sit.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre speaking to reporters on Air Force One, and that call to sit was because the plane was about to land. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, a Republican, at a news conference today at the state capitol building in Atlanta, gave an update on hurricane recovery in Georgia, saying that he did speak with President Biden and the Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack, who was accompanying the president today.
After being on the ground for the last 2 days and then getting back here and getting briefed, I wanted to give everybody an update of where we stand right now on the response to Hurricane Helene. I actually just got off the phone with President Biden and Secretary Vilsack. As you know, they're coming into the state today. I thanked them for visiting and also thanked them for thank the President for adding the additional counties to the disaster declaration. I did tell him that I felt certain he would hear on the road that there's still a lot of other counties out there that are expressing frustration that they haven't been added to that list yet. So he's aware of that situation on the ground, and Director Stallings and the team continues to work with FEMA in regards to that. Spoke directly to Secretary Vilsack about just the devastation that we've seen with crops in Georgia, with our pecan trees, with a lot of other things that's happening on the ground with our farms, poultry houses laying on the ground, and other things. So as you all know, the ag economy was not good before the storm, and it's worse now. And so I'm very appreciative of them being on the ground to take a look at that today, and I know they'll be hearing about that. Also on the way in this morning, spoke to Deputy Secretary Kathleen Hicks of the U.S. Department of Defense. She was just asking if we had any needs from DOD. I told them that General Wilson and the National Guard had the resources that we needed from a state perspective right now. We didn't have a need for federal action. And as of right now, that's where we are. General Wilson will speak more to that here in just a minute. After my urging, you all know that we had the 11 counties originally. We had a bipartisan letter of Congress supporting the 90 counties, and we're at 41 now. And as I've just mentioned, we'll continue to push for more counties and work with FEMA to do that. We did get some good news yesterday. Director Stallings told me that the administration has agreed to cover 100% of cleanup costs for the first 3 months, which is what we were requesting for them for the category A and B. That is something they agreed to and have announced.
Governor Brian Kemp, Republican from Georgia, at a news conference in Atlanta. WMAZ-TV in Macon, Georgia, writing about the press conference, saying one of the most long-standing issues is getting the power back on in counties that were hit hard from the storm. Governor Kemp says that the high was at 1.3 million customers without power, but after staying stubbornly high at nearly 575,000 without power at the start of this week, there are now just under 270,000 meters still without power in Georgia. From the Military Times, this article: the number of National Guard forces mobilized to help with Hurricane Helene relief efforts could continue to grow in the coming days. As the scope of the storm's devastation becomes clearer, military officials cautioned. Thursday, nearly 7,000 guardsmen and another 1,000 active duty soldiers have already been sent to communities across the southeastern United States to conduct search and rescue missions, clear damaged roads, and transport aid to hard-hit areas. Major General Wynn Burkett, Director of Domestic Operations and Force Development for the National Guard Bureau, told reporters that military officials are continuing to coordinate with state officials to best respond to their needs. Guard and reserve forces from 16 states are involved in the response to the hurricane. That was from the Military Times. Here is that reporter asking the question at today's virtual press conference with the National Guard.
Leo Shane from Military Times.
Yes, hi, thanks for doing this. I know you spoke that you don't know how long this mission will last and how long the response efforts are going to be there, but do you anticipate at this point the number of troops deployed and the number of troops responding here to go up? I know that the actual demands are changing as you go away from some of the search and rescue and into the clearing. I'm just wondering if what you're telling folks in terms of what to expect as you rotate folks in and out, if you think that number is going to go up, or are we kind of at the peak at this point?
Leo, I think kind of looking at answering your question holistically, I would anticipate the number to go up until it doesn't. And what I mean by that is If the states determine that they need more capability, or they need to start replacing some of the formations that they have, then we're going to provide that, and we're going to continuously look for solutions that would enable that as quickly as possible. I don't want to jinx anything, but there's another system that's making its way into the Gulf, and it's not completely formed. And even if it doesn't form, if it turns into a rain event, it could exacerbate the recovery operations, and it could have some negative impacts to that. So we will continue as guardsmen do until the governors tell us that all of our civilian partners have matters well in hand. Now, I'll stop there, and please, any of the states illuminate if you can.
Yes, sir. This is Lieutenant Colonel Meredith Richardson, Tennessee Army National Guard. So we have liaison officers embedded with every county's emergency operations center that we are operating in. So we are working very closely with those county EMAs and in discussion with them. As mentioned, they are still continuing to assess and determine what those needs are. So anytime that they come up with a requirement, we are working with them in order to help anticipate needs, and we're able to respond to whatever the requirement is.
This is Colonel Paul Holland from North Carolina. I'm not sure if we're at peak yet. We're still developing requirements. I think in another week or so, though, we'll be looking at how do we rotate people out, both for their own self-care, as well as being very conscious of the civilian employers that we're impacting by having our National Guardsmen on active duty, for an additional week or two on top of their normal commitment. So we'll be looking at that soon. As well.
Colonel Paul Halanek, North Carolina National Guard. You also heard Lieutenant Colonel Meredith Richardson from the Tennessee National Guard and Major General Ronald Wynn Burkett, Director, Domestic Operations and Force Development with the National Guard Bureau. A virtual news conference today. As mentioned earlier, Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack traveled with President Biden to Florida and Georgia today. And on Air Force One, he spoke about some of the hurricane-related relief programs at his department, including crop insurance, with the additional coverage, hurricane and wind damage, that's optional, help to repair structures and fences on agricultural facilities, removing debris, and for the loss of livestock. The Secretary was asked by reporters about the hurricane food and the 45,000 dock workers on strike now at 36 ports on the East and Gulf coasts. That strike now in its third day.
There was a story on the radio this morning about bananas being stuck at one of the ports, and they only last so long. Is there anything being done to get food that's stuck at ports out and perhaps to places like Asheville that have been affected by the storm?
Well, a lot of what we're talking about in terms of the ports are in containers. And so it's going to be difficult to get to the containers based on the fact that there's a work stoppage there. That's why the president has urged the shippers in particular to focus on getting this thing resolved and making sure that the collective bargaining system works. That's the most effective way of getting the bananas to wherever they need to go. And hopefully the shippers will come to the table, union will come to the table, collective bargaining will work, and we'll get this thing resolved quickly.
Secretary Vilsack, we've just gone through a period of pretty intense inflation that affected food prices. To what extent are you concerned that the kind of double whammy of the port strike and this really large-scale hurricane are going to exacerbate the kind of pressures on food prices that we saw that are just, abating now?
The current food inflation rate at grocery stores is around 1%, which is about half the 20-year average. So it is good to see that it has come down. At this point, a short labor stoppage at the ports should have minimal impact and effect on prices. Obviously, if we're talking about a longer situation of duration, that may have an impact. But at the end of the day, that's why the president has been so forceful in suggesting people to get to the table and they get this resolved. This is the first strike in 50 years. These people know how to get to yes. They just need to get to yes.
Can you define, I'm sorry, wait, can you define, please, what you mean by shorter and longer?
Well, the hope would be that this thing ends tomorrow, all right? That would be short. The reality is, our assessment is if this lasts a couple of weeks, we're not talking about a significant disruption. If you get into months, then obviously that's a different situation, which will cover it when and if that occurs.
Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack speaking to reporters on Air Force One flying from Washington down to Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican of Florida, posting on social media today, "It is unacceptable for the Biden-Harris administration to allow supply chain interruptions to hurt people who are reeling from a Category 4 hurricane." And at a news conference in Anna Maria, Florida, he announced executive actions he says will help open up the ports in his state.
At my direction, the Florida National Guard and Florida State Guard will be deployed to critical ports affected to maintain order and, if possible, resume operations which would otherwise be shut down during this interruption. Florida Department of Transportation is coordinating calls with seaport rail and trucking partners to ensure that all are prepared and positioned appropriately to limit disruptions to the supply chain in other areas should this continue. I'm also directing Florida Department of Transportation to temporarily waive the collection of tolls and other fees for commercial vehicles using public highways in Florida and waiving the size and weight restrictions normally governing vehicle transportation for the duration of this emergency. This will help expedite the movement of goods that have been impacted from seaports to intermodal logistics centers, distribution centers, and delivery points, and very well may help offset additional costs incurred by operation during this period. Finally, I'm directing the Florida Highway Patrol to manage the flow of traffic from all Florida seaports and adjacent roads and highways as needed to further expedite the flow of goods that are currently being held up. This will include the provision of law enforcement escorts for commercial motor vehicles by FHP officers upon request. And I would say that this is something that would have significant impacts on the nation's economy anyways, but to have this happen in a way that could negatively impact people that are reeling from a Category 4 hurricane, that is just simply unacceptable. So it really is incumbent upon the Biden-Harris administration to do everything in their power to ensure that these goods are where we need to be, that people are not left hanging out in the cold waiting for these goods if they're sitting in the ocean somewhere and they're not being able to be used here in the state of Florida or in Georgia or North Carolina or where people are going to desperately need this. We need to accelerate. We have no time for delays. Biden-Harris has a responsibility to stand up for the storm victims, stand up for the people who've had their homes damaged or who've lost their homes, and make sure they have what they need to get back on their feet.
Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican of Florida, holding a news conference in Anna Maria, Florida. Article from Reuters, Chicago Federal Reserve President Austin Goolsbee on Thursday said retailers and manufacturers had stockpiled about 2 weeks' worth of items in anticipation of the U.S. dockworkers strike, but the resulting supply chain disruptions could lead to higher prices if the labor dispute persists. He told WBZ, Chicago Public Radio Station, it starts as an inconvenience and it gets worse the longer it goes. He added the strike could mean the prices of some things might go up. That article from Reuters. Wall Street today, the Dow down 184, Nasdaq down 6, S&P down 9. Washington today continues in a minute.
Friday nights, watch C-SPAN's 2024 Campaign Trail, a weekly roundup of C-SPAN's campaign coverage, providing a one-stop shop to discover what the candidates across the country are saying to voters, along with first-hand accounts from political reporters, updated poll numbers, fundraising data, and campaign ads. Watch C-SPAN's 2024 Campaign Trail, Friday nights at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN, online at cspan.org, or download as a podcast on C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app, or wherever you get your podcasts. C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of politics.
Welcome back to Washington Today. It's available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. A rise in oil prices intensified Thursday, writes the Wall Street Journal, after President Biden suggested that U.S. officials are considering whether to support an Israeli strike on Iranian oil facilities, a move that could push gasoline prices higher just weeks before the presidential election. New York traded crude rose as much as 5%, putting it on track for its largest weekly gain in more than a year. That was the mid-afternoon reporting from the Wall Street Journal. President Biden made that comment during a brief exchange with reporters as he left the White House this morning.
We're in discussion with that. I think that would be a little, anyway.
Will you let Israel retaliate? What are the plans to allow Israel to strike back against Iran?
First of all, we don't allow Israel. We advise Israel, and there's nothing going to happen today. We'll talk about that later.
There'll be Americans in combat to help Israel, sir.
President Biden speaking to reporters on the South Lawn of the White House before boarding Marine One for his trip to Florida. Story from Al Jazeera. Iran has told the United States via an intermediary that any Israeli attack against Iran would meet an unconventional response that includes targeting Israeli infrastructure. In exclusive remarks to Al Jazeera, an Iranian official said on Thursday that his country has sent a message to the U.S. via Qatar addressing rising regional tensions after Iran's missile attack on Israel. In the message, Tehran told Washington that the phase of unilateral self-restraint has ended, adding that individual self-restraint does not secure our national security requirements. The indirect message also emphasized that Iran does not want a regional war, the official said. That was the article from Al Jazeera. At the Pentagon today, the Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh was asked about U.S. military preparations for whatever happens.
Have you had any additional conversations with the Israelis on this tension that we are seeing right now? We've got thousands of extra service members in the region. What's going on with them? Are they, are you shifting force posture? It seems like this is kind of a waiting game at this point.
So in terms of, what our forces in the Middle East are doing right now, their mission hasn't changed. They're there, to protect U.S. forces in the region, if called upon for the defense of Israel. But as you saw, that was put into place on October 1st when Iran launched another attack against Israel. Our forces, of course, stood with the IDF and the operation and, engaged nearly 200 ballistic missiles that were fired from Iran. So the mission hasn't changed. They continue to operate within the AOR and, will continue to do so. I'm sorry, what was your follow-on question?
It just seems like right now there's this very tense moment of waiting to see what Israel's response will be. What is this building doing right now to help tamper down that tension? And if Israel doesn't listen, is the Secretary prepared to send U.S. troops to combat to defend Israel?
Well, that's something that the president has spoken about. We're not looking for a wider regional conflict. We're not seeking war with any group or organization or country in the region. We continue to engage the Israelis, very frequently. We are certainly talking to them about their response, but what their response might be, I'm just not going to speculate further on. But we do continue to engage with them, and I'll just have to leave it at that.
The Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh at her news conference at the Pentagon. Another Reuters article, Israel's military told residents of more than 20 towns in South Lebanon to evacuate their homes immediately on Thursday as it pressed on with its cross-border incursion and struck Hezbollah targets in a suburb of Beirut. The latest warnings took the number of southern towns subject to evacuation calls to 70 and include the provincial capital, Nabatea, suggesting another Israeli military operation was imminent against the Iran-backed armed group. Hezbollah also carried out new strikes, targeting what it called Israel's base for military industries in Haifa Bay with a salvo of rockets, all reporting from Reuters. The U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said today at his news conference in Washington that the U.S. is taking additional steps to help Americans in Lebanon who want to leave.
As I said yesterday, we are working 24/7 to help provide U.S. citizens in Lebanon with as many options as possible to depart. We know that not all of them wish to leave, but our goal is to provide as many options as we can to make sure all of them are safe. First, we are working with U.S. airlines to block seats for U.S. citizens. We are also working to
with U.S.
with airlines. We are working with airlines to block seats for U.S. citizens. Excuse me. We are also working to increase the commercial capacity by organizing additional flights. In the past week, we have made over 1,400 seats available on flights out of Lebanon, and many seats do remain available. In addition, as I announced yesterday, we are organizing additional flights to allow more U.S. citizens and their eligible family members to depart Lebanon now. A second flight departed Beirut this morning with 134 passengers on it, bringing the total number of American citizens and their immediate family members who have departed on these flights to 250. And while we don't know the total number of U.S. citizens who have left via the seats we have made available on commercial flights, we do know that a high percentage of those seats have been filled. As I said at the top, we do recognize that a number of American citizens do not wish to leave. They have family members in Lebanon, and many of them are dual citizens, have lived there for a number of years. So we are also offering loans to U.S. citizens who may wish to stay in Lebanon, but want to instead relocate to a safer destination inside Lebanon. Americans in Lebanon should visit the embassy website or travel.state.gov to fill out our intake form so we can ensure that they are aware of all of the options available to them. And we urge Americans to take advantage of these options now while it is still safe to do so.
State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller at his news conference at the State Department. From Associated Press, the British government agreed Thursday to hand sovereignty of the long-contested Chagos Islands, an archipelago of more than 60 islands in the Indian Ocean, to Mauritius, in a deal to secure the future of a strategically important UK-US military base. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy said the agreement will secure the future of the base at Diego Garcia, the largest in the chain of remote islands off the tip of India that has been under British control for over 50 years. The base, which is home to around 2,500 personnel, mainly Americans, has been involved in military operations including the 2003 war in Iraq and the long-running war in Afghanistan. That was reporting from Associated Press. The U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller also spoke about this at his news conference.
The United States welcomes today's historic agreement between the Republic of Mauritius and the United Kingdom on the status of the Chagos Archipelago. The United States has strongly supported negotiations every step of the way as the two countries have negotiated over the past 2 years. It's a win for a diplomacy to see a successful outcome of this effort between two U.S. partners after more than a dozen rounds of talks. The agreement will secure the future of our joint U.S.-UK military facility on Diego Garcia, which plays a vital role in U.S. efforts to establish regional and global security, respond to crises, and counter some of the most challenging security threats of our time. The treaty between Mauritius and the UK also addresses wrongs of the past and demonstrates the commitment of both parties to support the welfare of Chagosians. Mauritius will now be free to implement a resettlement program on the islands of the Chagos Archipelago, other than Diego Garcia, and the UK will capitalize a new trust fund as well as separately provide other support for the benefit of Chagosians.
State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller. President Joe Biden putting out a statement in support of this agreement. As well, the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer of the Labour Party, putting out that statement. Another British member of Parliament, Tom Tugendhat, who is a candidate to lead the Conservative Party, told ODN News he thinks this is a bad deal.
The jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice is only there when states agree. The UK should not agree that the jurisdiction applies in this case. We should never have agreed. We should not have begun the negotiations in November 2022. And a paper by Richard Eakins in Policy Exchange and a second one forwarded by the then Lord Chancellor Robert Buckland sets out exactly why this was such a bad idea. What it does is it means that although the airbase, which is jointly UK-US operated, is maintained on a 99-year lease, the other outlying islands go back to Mauritian sovereignty. Now, there are many other countries which will be interested in a permanent base in the Indian Ocean, China being one of them.
Tom Tugendhat, British member of Parliament. He's running for leader of the Conservative Party. New York Times article putting some context on this agreement. Britain's control of the Chagos Islands, which dates back to the colonial era, has come under increased criticism in recent years with a series of unfavorable court rulings and mounting diplomatic pressure. In the 1960s, Britain granted Mauritius independence but carved out the Chagos Islands and evicted more than 1,000 inhabitants whose ancestors were taken there by the French as slaves from Africa and India in the early 18th century. Formal negotiations between Britain and Mauritius over the Chagos began in 2022, when the government in London was run by the Conservatives, having gained momentum when African countries began pressing Britain to hand over sovereignty. The Chagos, some said, were Britain's last colony in Africa. And lastly, on Washington Today, the director of the National Reconnaissance Office, Christopher Scalise, did an interview today at CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, about the work and challenges of his Defense Department agency that builds, launches, and operates reconnaissance satellites. Early on in the talk, he said that things have come pretty far technologically since the 1960s. In the early days, he said, they were using film that had to be returned to Earth to be developed.
I remember the old TV show 24 and laughing when they were like, redirect the satellites from my cell phone. It's like, if only we could do that. But we're getting closer and closer to that real-time look-in that you're talking about. I'm going to ask you to explain, though, dropping buckets from the sky, because that's a literal thing that used to happen. So what did that mean?
So in the 1960s, it was very difficult to take pictures and beam them to Earth. I mean, today we have cell phones, and anybody that was probably born after 1990 has no idea what film is. And so the most efficient way to get it was to put the camera in space, have the film with the camera, take the picture, roll up the film when you're done taking all the pictures, put it in a bucket, essentially a re-entry vehicle, and drop it down to Earth with a parachute. And if you ever get a chance, go to YouTube and watch it. It's Corona capture of a film capsule coming down. An airplane would catch it in the air, and then it would go and the film would get processed, and those imageries would be distributed. But I think there's one other thing that we should mention. The first really capable NRO satellite that delivered was called GRAB. It was about 20 inches. And it was, so it would be considered a CubeSat today. And that one did transmit information to the ground directly, but it wasn't images. It was locating where radars are.
A massive leap forward.
Discussion with Christopher Scalise, director of the NRO, National Reconnaissance Office. You heard also from Emily Harding, Center for Strategic and International Studies, Intelligence, National Security, and Technology Director, part of a CSIS program. Today, C-SPAN covered it all. You can find the full video at our website, cspan.org. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, Word for Word, and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.